David Davis.
Deputy Speaker, before I turn to the substance of my speech, I want to just take on a matter raised by the Honourable Lady early on. She called out, where's the data in this? And there's been already one set of answers with respect to the chilling effect, which you can't measure. But also, the issue here is quite important in terms of the importance of free speech. The changes, I'm a scientist by training. All of the transformations in science, every single one of them, has been a challenge of an existing paradigm. It's often been opposed, often by the church. We heard about Darwin, but Kepler and Copernicus and others at the same time. And right throughout science has been challenges to existing science, and that has been 1,000 times more important than anything you can measure, and you can't judge it in advance. So I just make that point about the importance of free speech. My honourable friend said free speech is a fundamental principle. That's why it's a fundamental principle, and why you can't simply go on a percentage here and a percentage there. Now, this country has for over 300 years enshrined our right, this Parliament in fact has enshrined our right to free speech in law. The 1689 Bill of Rights became a symbol of hope for the rights of people everywhere. It's the most fundamental of freedoms, and it became a symbol for everywhere. And in 1948, it was enshrined as Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Remember, 1948, after we talk about Holocaust deniers, the most sensitive time in terms of these sorts of arguments. And what it said was, everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. Now today that right is under threat, and I'm amazed the Labour Party hasn't recognised that, but let's see how we get on. Today it's under threat. It's under threat in the very institutions where it should be most treasured, namely our universities. And I'll come back to some facts on the matter in a minute. Now, freedom of speech only matters where it's controversial, when it's challenging. And that's why the greatest characterisation of free speech is the one attributed to Voltaire, who said, I may detest what you say. I think that was the original phrasing. I may detest what you say, but I'll fight to the death for your right to say it. I generally try not to detest or even dislike my political opponents, although there is one Labour member who did attack J.K. Rowling in the most disgraceful terms. But I would not for a second want to see him cancelled. I'd want to see him here, debating the issue, because he'd lose the debate, because that's our protection in terms of free speech. It's challenge, not obliteration, challenge. Voltaire understood that creativity and progress in a society is dependent on acts of intellectual rebellion, dissent, disagreement and controversy, no matter how uncomfortable. But today, the cancel culture movement think it's reasonable to obliterate the views of people they disagree with, rather than challenge them in open debate. And social media, the interesting element of the latter part of my career is watching the change to this. Social media has had an extraordinary impact here. It's accelerated the growth of online lynch mobs, it's magnified their effect, and it's facilitated their organisation. Today, in one second, today there is a terrible outbreak of intolerance in modern society, the so-called culture wars, which remind me of nothing so much as McCarthyism in the United States. When I first, as it were, came of age politically, this was still in memory, both McCarthyism and the end of Stalinism. And this is like the early stages of a totalitarian repression in other countries. I give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank the Right Honourable Member for giving way, and I agree with him about the problem. I thank the Right Honourable Member for giving way, and I agree with him wholeheartedly about the concerns about what's happening on social media. Isn't that precisely why we need an online harms bill to tackle that sort of abuse?
And regulate.
Rather than this bill we have in front of us today.
Precisely.
She prefaces the argument I'm going to bring, which is that we do need to use the online harms bill as well, but this bill is just a part of that. And as I said, this reminds me of McCarthyism, the behaviour that we've seen in the online battles that have taken place. And if honourable members think that's an exaggeration, I recommend that they read the account in the Sunday Times 3 weeks ago by Christina Lamb, or indeed by Christina Lamb, or indeed of her mistreatment, or indeed by Suzanne Moore of hers. The incredible and repressive physical violence, alongside heavily orchestrated attacks on their reputations of work, were frightening in the extreme to people whose reputations were already well established. So it's no wonder that ordinary people are terrified to speak out for fear of losing their jobs, their friends, their reputation. This is the chilling issue that we've been talking about here. Now, the bill before us is to correct a small, and I grant you it's small, but extraordinarily important symbolic aspect of this modern McCarthyism, namely the attempt to no platform a number of speakers, including Amber Rudd, Julie Bindel, Peter Hitchens, Peter Tatchell, and others. I hope it's just the first step, actually, in a programme to bring free speech back to Britain. And I name them here rather than enumerate them for a reason. I name them because these are all established people. And again, if you can terrorise or suppress or put down established people with high reputation, then how is it going to be for somebody without the defences that they have? Now, the new bill, as the Secretary of State said, replaces Section 43 of the Education No. 2 Act. Again, the Honourable Lady also referred to that as well, which imposes an obligation to take reasonably practical steps to uphold free speech on campus. Well, this replaces it with a slightly broader duty and extends it to apply to student unions as well. And I think that's correct. It also creates some enforcement mechanisms, again what's missing before. So students and academics and visiting speakers whose speech rights are being violated can hold higher education providers and student unions to account. Now, if your speech rights are breached by a university, you can lodge a complaint with the Director for Freedom of Speech, and they'll have the power to investigate it. And if it's upheld, fine the institution in question and compensate the victim. The students, academics or speakers will also be able to sue for denial of free speech. Now, it's important that these mechanisms work. That's why this is important as an adjunct to the existing legislation. It's important they work because the suppression of free speech in universities has a chilling effect on free speech in all of society. It is the pinnacle of free speech in our society, and so if you remove it there, you then facilitate and legitimise removing it everywhere else. But it's also, to come back to the point the Honourable Lady raised with me, it's also important that we follow this up in other areas. In the Online Harms Bill, we should protect free speech from casual suppression by commercial platforms. We should look hard at the effect of organised online intimidation and seek to make it less easy, perhaps by removing anonymity from perpetrators. And I make one aside to the spokesman, the Honourable Lady, spokesman for the opposition on this, is to say this. She talked about anti-vaxxers. I am very pro-vaccine for fairly obvious reasons. But in the name of suppressing anti-vaxxer propaganda, quite a lot of legitimate scientists who had objections to the exact mechanisms of lockdown or who were raising concerns about blood clots and so on found themselves suppressed online. So I think you have to recognise this is not an easy dividing line to take. Managed free speech is a very hard idea to promote, pursue and make work. Modern communications are a major force for either good or evil. We should make sure that we facilitate the right one. And this bill is just the first step in that important process.